and welcome to this Friday edition of Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you, and the big focus tonight, what else but the epoch-making UK elections. Let's get started. Change has come to the United Kingdom. The country has thrown out the Rishi Sunak-led Conservative government after 14 years in power and handed a landslide win to Labour, with the latter winning a staggering 412 out of 650 seats in the House of Commons. Labour leader Keir Starmer is the new British Prime Minister. Once the election results became clear, Starmer met King Charles at Buckingham Palace and was formally invited to form a government. The transfer of power began with Rishi Sunak, the first British Prime Minister of Indian origin, giving a speech outside 10 Downing Street for the last time. He took responsibility for the Tories' worst electoral performance in modern times. He said, "I've heard your anger, I'm sorry." He also announced that he was stepping down as the Conservative leader. Sunak then went to deliver his resignation to the King. In his first speech as Prime Minister, Labour leader Keir Starmer said, "Our work is urgent and we begin it today." Starmer has promised to rebuild the country's infrastructure of opportunity, brick by brick. "Country first, party second, that's how we will serve," he said. He spoke of the need for schools and affordable homes, things that working class families like mine can build their lives around, he said. Starmer admitted that he had his task cut out when he said changing a country is not like flicking a switch, as the world is far more volatile today. It will take a while, but the work begins immediately. He also talked about wealth creation, getting the NHS back on its feet, facing the future and securing the UK borders. Let's now look at how exactly this election has panned out for the various political players in the United Kingdom. Labour, with its historic victory, has won quite a few seats that rivals the all-time best it achieved under Tony Blair in 1997. The Liberal Democrats, Reform UK and the Greens have each achieved their best ever showing at the polls, respectively managing 71, 4 and 4 seats. The Scottish National Party suffered a bruising night in Scotland, mustering only 9 seats compared with 48 in 2019. As for the Tories, the night for the party was so catastrophic that even Liz Truss lost her seat less than 2 years after serving as Prime Minister. The party has been routed in Wales and Scotland as well, and seen some of its biggest leaders losing. The warning signs were present for several weeks, perhaps months, as UK voters battled a cost of living crisis, economic challenges, skyrocketing house prices, a growing immigration problem, poor infrastructure and healthcare, a crumbling National Health Service, among other issues. The Tories had a serious image problem as well. Rishi Sunak scored poorly in all these barometers, including overseeing the country's lowest growth rate since the early 19th century and a steep cost of living increase, the highest in 41 years. The British economy has slowed significantly over the past decade, even accounting for the global crisis triggered by the COVID pandemic. Its GDP per capita grew just 4.3% from 2007 to 2023. In the previous 16 years, that figure was a massive 46%. This meant incomes stagnated. The NHS is seen as the crown in the British government's public services. The Conservatives had repeatedly stressed the importance of the NHS, but that concern never translated into on-ground support for doctors, nurses and medical professionals. In April this year, there were an estimated 7.6 million people waiting for treatment under the NHS scheme, of which over 50,000 had been on the list for more than a year. Of course, Brexit too played its part, with movement restrictions meaning medical professionals from mainland Europe could either not be hired or chose not to sign up. Immigration was another major issue for the voters. Sunak's government had promised to crack down on illegal entrance into the UK, but its Rwanda policy, supposed to act as a major deterrent, failed to deliver. In fact, 2 years after its announcement, not one plane has taken off for the African nation. Of course, many around the world have strongly criticized that policy, terming it inhumane. The Conservatives spent over £300 million on the scheme, which they said would deter illegal immigrants from entering the UK on small boats across the English Channel. Under this policy, those caught would be sent to Rwanda while they apply for asylum. But it wasn't just Sunak's failures that led to the Conservatives' downfall in this election. Boris Johnson was elected as the Tories' leader and the Prime Minister in July 2019, shortly before the pandemic struck. His chaotic leadership precipitated a revolt by his own ministers, and the Partygate scandal that referred to parties at 10 Downing Street during COVID pandemic lockdowns made matters far worse. Johnson resigned in June last year following an investigation that he called a witch hunt. Johnson was followed by Liz Truss, the UK's fourth female Prime Minister and its shortest-serving leader. Truss, who has lost her seat this time, faced criticism for the way she handled the economy, including a controversial mini-budget that led to market turmoil. Her leadership was further undermined by U-turns on policy and a loss of confidence among MPs. That cost Liz Truss her job. As far as the Labour leader is concerned, since taking up the role in early 2020, Keir Starmer repositioned the party to the centre and fixed problems within the party that included infighting. Labour's victory in this election has been seismic and nearly unprecedented. Only Tony Blair's Labour Party has ever won more seats in an election. However, Starmer would do well to remember that the election was as much about the public's anger towards the Conservatives as it might have been about excitement over Labour's offer. His party has only increased its vote share by a few percentage points from its dismal 2019 showing. Starmer won a smaller vote share than his predecessor Jeremy Corbyn did in 2017, an election that Labour lost. It was helped in seat after seat by a strong showing from populists Reform UK, who tore votes away from the Conservatives. Those statistics highlight the oddities of Britain's first past-the-post voting system, but also the dangers facing Starmer. He will govern with a powerful majority in Parliament, but the public coalition he has built will not afford him a long honeymoon period. He will be opposed by the Conservatives and also by Reform UK, which challenged Labour candidates in several seats. While Starmer was far more popular than Sunak, according to opinion polls, he has never enjoyed the healthy approval ratings that Tony Blair and Boris Johnson once did, lacking the natural charisma or campaigning prowess of those leaders. Also troubling for Labour is the party's slide back in parts of the country with a large Muslim population, a continuation of a trend seen in local elections since Israel's war against Hamas began in Gaza. Election victories don't fall from the sky. They are hard won and hard fought for. Starmer acknowledged in his victory speech today. He has promised a decade of national renewal, a pledge that nods to the deep-seated problems in Britain's public services.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace, where I accepted an invitation from His Majesty the King to form the next government of this great nation. I want to thank the outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. His achievement as the first British Asian Prime Minister of our country, the extra effort that will have required, should not be underestimated by anyone. And we pay tribute to that today. And we also recognise the dedication and hard work he brought to his leadership. But now our country has voted decisively for change, for national renewal, and a return of politics to public service. When the gap between the sacrifices made by people and the service they receive from politicians grows this big, it leads to a weariness in the heart of a nation. a draining away of the hope, the spirit, the belief in a better future.
To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all, but you have sent a clear signal that the government of the United Kingdom must change, and yours is the only judgment that matters. I have heard your anger, your disappointment, and I take responsibility for this loss. It pains me to think how many good colleagues who contributed so much to their communities and our country will now no longer sit in the House of Commons. I thank them for their hard work and their service. Following this result, I will step down as party leader, not immediately, but once the formal arrangements for selecting my successor are in place.
Okay, let's go straight across to our guests. Joining me on Global Lens tonight, Professor Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics at Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin. Welcome back, Professor. We also have with us Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former Indian diplomat. Warm welcome to both of you. Professor Lucas, starting with you. Britain has a new government. It has a new Prime Minister. It was such a bad night for the Tories that a dozen cabinet ministers, including former Prime Minister Liz Truss, have ended up losing their seats. But talking about the historic landslide for Labour, would it be correct to say that they've almost equaled the record that had been set by Tony Blair's Labour back in 1997? What message do you think the voters of the United Kingdom have sought to send out to both Labour and the Tories through this mandate?
You're right that Tony Blair's 1997 landslide had 418 MPs. At this point, Labour has 412.
Close enough.
Almost the same in 2000. Yes. Close enough, exactly. And you're absolutely right. Well, what's different is that the Conservatives in 1997 still had 165 MPs. They only have 121 who returned, which is their all-time historic low. So what does it mean? First of all, overall, it means people were tired after the last 14 years of economic stagnation. They were tired, or at least a lot of them were tired of social division that had taken place. They were tired because the government had been marked by negligence, including during the COVID pandemic. It had been marked by lying, including by certain former prime ministers. It had even been marked by corruption. All of this was, as Keir Starmer put it, the new prime minister, was draining hope and was draining pride from the nation. So the message to Labour is, do better. I mean, as simple as that. But there's a broader message that goes beyond your headline about the landslide. And I think this is going to be important to watch. In fact, two things. One is, this is a much more diverse Britain in terms of the parties who are here in 2024 than it was in 1997. Think about the Liberal Democrats, who only had 8 seats going into this election. They now have 71 by putting a priority on health care, on social care, and on responsibility. Think about the emergence of the Green Party, who for the first time have 7% of the vote and have 4 MPs. Think of the upstart Reform Party, this far-right party that has split the Conservative vote. They have 4 MPs, and they are threatening a civil war with the Conservatives that might drag the Conservatives hard right. So all that adds to this landscape. And here's the second important point. As much as hope and change are important today, Labour is going to be fighting for hope and change with one hand behind its back because of the one word that was not mentioned yesterday during the election coverage, which is Brexit. Immigration is not the fundamental problem here in the UK. The fundamental problem in the UK is public services. But to deliver public services, you need a growing economy. And Brexit has not led to a growing economy. It has crippled the economy for the foreseeable future.
Okay, very interesting. Clearly, Keir Starmer has his task cut out for him. Professor Lucas, let me ask you this. Would it be correct to say that even though Labour under Keir Starmer have won a historic mandate. The public are unlikely to afford Keir Starmer a long honeymoon period because there is so much public anger and disillusionment with the political class, with the outgoing government, that, you know, it would perhaps be correct to say that they're not going to give the new government a very long rope. They want the new incumbent to hit the ground running and deliver on every important front, as you mentioned, the economy, the cost of living crisis, National Health Service, to name just a few.
I agree. Everybody wants them to hit the ground running. And Labour's already said they're going to move on 6 immediate plans, which cover, for example, cost of living, which cover the National Health Service, which cover issues like effective fiscal planning. But I don't necessarily agree with this word that kept being thrown around last night, which is voter volatility. The reason why voters left the Conservatives in large part was not just because of the damage of Brexit, but it was because many of the Conservatives in power had become irresponsible, had become abusive. And I will refer now to one name, you know, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. In fact, two, Boris Johnson, who was forced out because of his lying, and then Liz Truss, who, as you noted, the former Prime Minister, lost her seat last night because of that abusive 6 weeks she spent as Prime Minister. I think Keir Starmer, whether or not you agree with his policies, is a much more responsible and a much more pragmatic leader. So I think Labour will get a bit of time to establish themselves. I think the risk here in the UK, similar to that in other countries, is that the reality of what needs to be done is not matched actually by a productive media environment. And here I'll give you one example. Reform, which is the party threatening to further damage the Conservatives. They took about half the Conservative vote last night, have 2 national channels, which are effectively their propaganda outlets in the UK, Talk TV and GB News. So day after day after day, you're going to get this drumbeat trying to play up Nigel Farage, the Reform Party leader. I think that is a social media and a media challenge that Britain needs to face. And it needs to be faced not only by the Labour Party, but by other parties who did well last night. I think the Liberal Democrats need to establish that they will work with Labour on issues like healthcare and social care, and the Greens will need to establish that they can work with Labour on issues like the environment.
Okay, very quickly, I know this is a complex subject, Professor Lucas, but you know, there are many who say that the first past the post system that Britain follows is in some ways an odd one, because, correct me if I'm wrong, the vote share of the Labour Party seems to have gone up only to some extent, and yet the translation of that vote share into the massive number of seats that they've garnered in this election has been absolutely mind-boggling. For those who don't fully understand the first past the post system, could you please very quickly put this into perspective for us?
Well, I wish we had an entire program about this archaic system. Labour got about 36% of the vote last night. In its historic defeat only 5 years ago, when it had one of its lowest numbers of seats in the 20th century, it had 35% of the vote, almost exactly the same. So what changed? In first past the post, if you have many parties who are running, you still can win the vote if you're first amongst those many parties, say with 30% of the vote, if the vote is split 4 or 5 ways. Well, that's what happened last night, because we had the Reform Party, the Green Party. We have up in Scotland, the Scottish Nationalist Party. We have the Welsh Party, for example. We had a number of independents who are running. So what happens with first past the post is that the vote is distributed among people, but only one person can win in a constituency. In Ireland, where I now live, we don't have first past the post. We have transferable voting, which means that you get a much more representative parliament based on parties' vote shares. So Britain has this obsolete system which happened to benefit Labour last night. I think there will be pressure to change it, however, because of the many parties that now are seeing only a limited return, even though they get maybe, as happened with the Liberal Democrats, 12% of the vote. Reform got 14%, and even the Greens with 7%. If there was proportional representation, they would have more MPs in Parliament.
All right. I know you have to go, Professor Lucas. Very quickly, my final question to you. Would it be correct to say that Rishi Sunak, in a sense, has paid the price for the mess to a large extent created by his two predecessors? And given that he still has age on his side and has managed to hang on to at least his own seat in Richmond, can we say that Rishi Sunak is far from finished?
You know, I know many people in India were very proud when Britain got its first Anglo-Indian prime minister, Rishi Sunak, and they should have been. But Rishi Sunak was handcuffed. He had predecessors in Boris Johnson and Liz Truss who had absolutely not only damaged the country, they had damaged the Conservative Party's chances of recovering legitimacy. And he couldn't overcome that. Now, in part, that was Rishi Sunak's fault when he was prime minister, because he became captive to the right wing of the party. He became captive to their rhetoric. And far from being that very effective chancellor, which I think in some ways he had been during the pandemic, he was falling into these right-wing slogans that did not resonate with a lot of British people. That's part of a wider problem now. We're not going to see Rishi Sunak back because I think the Conservative Party has swung very hard to the right. So here are the names to watch out for. Kimi Badenoch, and then two names that I think your our viewers will probably recognize, Suella Braverman and Priti Patel. The difference between them and Rishi Sunak was more of a pragmatist. These people are right-wing ideologues.
Interesting. Though Suella Braverman is, of course, somebody who has the dubious distinction of being sacked rather unceremoniously by the same Prime Minister that we're talking about today. I think the biggest lesson really for all politicians from these elections should be do not take the voter for granted ever. On that note, Professor Scott Lucas, thank you so much for your time and perspective.
Thank you, and thank all your viewers.
All right, I need to take a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. We'll continue this conversation on the other side with our other panelists.
Who am I?
Nobody can crack that mystery.
There is a certain expectation of me.
That's the only contradiction.
Life itself is stranger than fiction.
I was a perfectly normal person born in an abnormal world.
I really didn't understand why is it different.
Just imagine a child who is bullied every day.
Boys school में कुछ लड़का लोग मेरे साथ sexual abuse किए.
मुझे तेरे बारे में सब पता है और मैं तेरा रेप कर लूँगा.
You also start to stigmatize.
अरे ये तो time pass है.
Sex doesn't come in the picture. Sex comes later. Then there are man-made narratives.
Why do you walk like that? Why do you sway so much? So you can understand the trauma of a person who's trapped in a wrong body.
But nothing can bind life.
We have to reclaim the lost position. We fought for more than 10 years.
Today I'm the mother of the industry.
I'm a first transgender member judge.
You can't walk in everybody's shoes.
This is what I'm comfortable with. They just are what they are.
You become the light yourself.
That is the change that I was looking for.
When I recognize myself, it's a small story, but it's an interesting one.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we're discussing the UK elections. With me on the show is Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former Indian diplomat, Chirayu Thakkar, doctoral candidate of international relations at the National University of Singapore, and Pathikrit Pain, foreign affairs analyst. Thanks to all of you for joining me, and Ambassador Suresh Goyal, thank you for your patience. We had to let Lucas go early. Let me ask you this question. The fact that Labour was headed for a big win was a foregone conclusion. But a landslide of this nature, the Tories being wiped out, many of their cabinet ministers losing their seats, former Prime Minister Liz Truss losing her own seat, and Labour ending up with a staggering 412 out of 650 seats in the House of Commons, which is very close to what Tony Blair's Labour had achieved in 1997. What explains this victory margin for Labour? Does it indicate to you that there was a lot of anger amongst the British public with the Tories?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I will have to be leaving in 2 minutes' time. I had explained to the coordinator when I got a call. Just 2 minutes, basically, and all I will say really is that it was completely expected. The vote was not really basically Labour, but the vote was against Conservatives. For the last 14 years, the kind of infighting that seen, the kind of economic policies which had been followed despite all the attempts by Rishi Sunak to get the corrections done through the taxation and the revenue policies, it didn't work out really. It was not really the taxation policies, the economic policies, but the effect on essentially what you saw, the health services, immigration, unemployment. I was in the UK recently for about 2 weeks, and I found the anger amongst all the British public, including the immigrants and the British nationals, who all felt really that their employment opportunities, whether they were immigrants or British natives, irrespective, were impacted by what was happening in the UK. And they all wanted change in the economic policies of the government. They all wanted the government to get along, really go on the way. And I think, therefore, it was really a vote more against the Conservative Party in fighting amongst them, their irrational, unorganized policies rather than the Labour, which in any case has become more centrist really than leftist. And therefore, I would not say that it was a vote for the Labour Party. I would say it was a vote against the Conservatives, number one. Number two, I think the Labour Party has a lot and quite a lot to really go forward within Europe and in the world. Within Europe, they will have a lot to do really. The policies in the European Union are not very clear as to what they want, because if they are against immigration, European Union is going in a different direction. How do they want to achieve it really? Employment, how will they work it out really? Brexit has already taken place. They can't become part of the European Union agreement anymore. Therefore, there is a lot of difficult terrain to cover for Keir Starmer. I'm not saying Labour, because he's not really a leftist anymore. He's a Prime Minister candidate. He's Labour. He has a lot to do. Let us see how he manages it. Thank you, Neha, and bye.
Thank you, Ambassador Goel. Let's certainly hope it's not a crown of thorns for Keir Starmer. Let me take this to Pathikrit Pine. Pathikrit Pine, it's interesting. While Europe seems to be moving right, going by some of the recent developments that we've seen, whether it was the European Parliament election or even the parliamentary election in France, the UK has voted in a centre-left party, that too with a landslide majority. It is of historic proportions, nearly unprecedented. The question really is, what do you think would be the expectations of the people of United Kingdom from the new Prime Minister? And do you think he will be able to deliver? Because as was stated by our guest from the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer is perhaps going to have to function with one hand tied behind his back.
Good evening, Neha. I would rather say both of his hands would be tied, and as you rightly mentioned, it's going to be a crown of thorns. The reason is this: no government, in its lifetime would ever put in harsh reforms, go for stringent restrictions on welfare schemes if there is abundance of money. The problem with the United Kingdom is the same as you see in other countries of Western Europe, where primarily in case of UK, because of the Brexit, because of the COVID-related challenges, and in addition to that, the Ukraine war had a debilitating impact so far as the economy is concerned, and so the healthcare measures could not be addressed. A lot of restrictions came in. Secondly, when it comes to the job market, the Brexit issue did play its part. The COVID Ukraine war had a tremendous impact in terms of raising the cost of energy so much. Many industries became unviable. You had almost outsourced everything in terms of manufacturing to China. So that policy is there, and you had an overwhelming number of immigrants coming up and vying for the same jobs which your original voters are looking for at the same time. So there are challenges. Now the issue is this: if the Labour Party comes and says, I'm going to do this, that on healthcare, I'm going to solve all the problems, the question is this, one simple question: where is the money? Because if you have to have money, you have to completely restructure a lot of things that you have done. First and foremost, you need to have an alternate to Brexit in terms of long, viable, profound free trade agreement with other countries like India, which is not going to happen because India is not going to give it to you in a cake, in a platter. They will ask for hard bargains. Secondly, there's a lot of commitment that United Kingdom has when it comes to the Ukraine conflict. Now, will the Labour Party do away with those commitments and say that we are no more into that conflict? We will have a separate foreign policy. If they say that no, we will not have a separate foreign policy, we'll continue with the conflict, that means the taxpayers' money will go for the same issue, which has been one of the reasons responsible for the mess in the domestic sector. Third, when it comes to the immigration issue, the challenges remain same. When it comes to legal immigration, it is difficult for them to completely curb it, especially from India, because otherwise the UK university system will collapse. Nobody will study there. But if you ask them to come in and then you allow them to work, the number of jobs have shrunk tremendously. So where are the jobs? How would you create jobs? Fourth, another issue that is there is because of the pampering that happens of the illegal immigrants. So I would rather say, as one of the previous panelists also mentioned, and you rightly mentioned, the vote share has gone up by 1.5% or 2% for Labour, whereas Conservatives lost it by almost 18 to 20%. It is a vote against. In case of other countries also, where you see they're tilting towards the other side, which is more right-leaning, is because they look them as a viable alternative. Here, there was no right-leaning which was a viable alternative. For majority of the British people, National Front is not a viable alternative. The viable alternative remains the Labour, so they voted for it. It has to be seen how they would operate. Remember, Tony Blair was equally involved in the Ukraine war, so in the Iraq war. So I don't think they would have a foreign policy which is independent of what America preaches and propagates of what NATO does. Last but not the least, any party, Neha, had it been the Labour been in power when the COVID situation happened and a Ukraine war happened, they would have suffered the same fate which the Conservatives are facing today. So the most lucky parties, political parties, were those who were not in power during the COVID situation. Only perhaps the exception is Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who went through those difficult times and still been able to retain power. That's an exception in the world. The rest are all in a mess. So I don't think till the time we will see a change in the foreign policy or the policy towards doing away with entertaining secessionist elements. Otherwise, the free trade agreement will not happen unless they do away with their entire policy of outsourcing manufacturing to China, unless they do something about illegal immigrants who are coming and taking away the jobs. I think it's only a matter of time. In 6 months' time, the voters would ask the same questions to the Labour Party than they were asking to the Conservatives. Fundamentally, one issue is simple: where is the money with which the Labour would want to do the things that they have been promising to the people? Otherwise, if the money was available, Rishi Sunak would have done it before. Keir Starmer would have pledged for it. Back to you. So the problems remain the same. Let's see how
very interesting analysis. Where is the money? Keir Starmer may well be wearing a crown of thorns, and as has been pointed out, he is unlikely to have a very long honeymoon period. And I agree with you completely about how the Tories bore the brunt of the COVID pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war, and any party in their place would have perhaps suffered the same fate. Let me take this now to Chirayu Thakkar. Chirayu Thakkar, as was stated by our guest from the UK, and this is widely acknowledged, that Brexit has been a complete disaster and it's dealt a massive blow to the British economy. And the economy hasn't recovered. It continues to reel, not just under the disastrous impact of Brexit, but under various other global issues, including, of course, the outcome of the COVID pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war, to name a few factors. But the question that arises is, Brexit was primarily a Boris Johnson project and a Nigel Farage project. Why would the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, say one day before the elections, we will not return to the European Union ever in my lifetime? And does that stand make sense at all?
Yeah, good evening and thank you for having me. I think what Keir Starmer said was an inevitability. Europe had already been very clear. There were very clear statements from Brussels that this marriage is never going to happen again. There was no possibility of retracting from the Brexit vote. So it was an inevitability. Now, people have emphasized this statement a lot, but what Keir Starmer's consistent signaling has been is that the mess that Tories have created across 3 successive administrations, or rather 4 successive administrations, they are going to change that, and they are going to bring life back to normalcy. Now, what the other panelists were saying, those all things are really true. There is no way that you can completely undo what has been done about Brexit. A lot of the problems that a common Britisher is today facing is due to Brexit. We are looking at some of the videos in the aftermath of the Brexit, and what was happening was that if flowers used to come from Europe, they would travel and cross the channel in 2 hours or through the other route in 2 hours, and from the port they would reach London in another 2 to 3 hours. So once they are shipped from Europe, continental Europe, they would reach London's market in like 5 to 6 hours. That was the past. Now with all this customs, a lot of problems are being created for every commodity. That creates problems for consumers, that creates problems for traders, and nobody who was with Brexit or opposing Brexit within Tories really took upon the mantle and cleared that mess, put things into motion in such a way that these issues are resolved before they left 10 Downing Street or before they called an election. So that was a lingering issue, and Keir Starmer is saying that although I may not be able to reverse the entire damage, what I'll at least do it, I'll put things into motion. I'll make sure that there are relevant processes so that some of this can be mitigated. Currently, the impact of Brexit is an unmitigated disaster. By mitigating some of those circumstances, they can, give new hope to citizens who are going to vote or who voted yesterday. So I agree with what has been said previously, that there is no magic wand with Keir Starmer, but at least applying common sense, applying mind, and try to resolve some of these issues would be an easy path forward. And just one line, had Rishi Sunak some more time, he would have done something about many of these challenges. But we also have to remember that Rishi Sunak got a very small window of opportunity to clear the map and to build back the party and set in motion the policy wheel. So that was his challenge.
Oddly enough, he could have had another few months in office. He could have completed 2 years in office. He jumped the gun. He decided to call a snap poll. That obviously hasn't gone well for him or his party, even though he's somehow managed to cling to his own seat, which he did fear losing. But one can't help but feel bad for Rishi Sunak, not only because he was the first British Prime Minister of Indian origin, so of course all of us Indians had a soft spot for him, but also because, as has been mentioned, he really did pay the price for the mess that he had inherited from Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Let me now turn our focus to what the new government and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom might mean for India-UK ties. Pathik Ritpan, let me ask you first. Now, Keir Starmer is somebody who has more or less made all the right noises in the context of India-UK ties. He has, expressed a willingness and a desire to strengthen the relationship. He has said he's committed to a free trade agreement. He's made this remark while visiting temples in the UK that there is no place for Hindu phobia in the UK. However, India was quite irked with his remarks on Kashmir. That is something he will probably need to do a bit of damage control on. What do you think India can expect from the new Prime Minister and Labour government?
So Neha, we will have to see how things evolve, because individually he did make some positive statements in the recent past, even though some other statements were made, unfortunate statements about the Kashmir issue. But the fact is this, that every United Kingdom Prime Minister, or that matter, any other Western European country or the American president, makes some great comments, statements on India. When it comes to the brass tacks, situation becomes different. Overall, you would see a continuity in good relation, those things, sharing of intelligence, work is going on, talks are going on, and to collaborate with Rolls-Royce for making India's indigenous engine, fighter combat engine. So those things will continue. The fundamental issue is this: the thorn in the whole free trade agreement would remain as to what would be the stand of United Kingdom when it comes to elements who want to do harm to the sovereignty of India, and how would the present dispensation deal with them if they show the same approach as has been done by the previous regime. I don't think India would be too much interested in having the free trade agreement in that case. Number two, we have to understand the compulsion of the political parties, because such is the large number of people from Mirpur primarily, which is in POK, who are settled in the United Kingdom, that it is difficult for the Labour to ignore their sentiments and give out a complete, go and say that we are absolutely pro-India. They will not do that. So, and we should not expect it. So I think the thorns in the crown will continue to be there. Overall, we may see some changes. We also have to see what is their approach towards China. We also have to see how they deal with the Ukraine issue, because if their approach of antagonism continues towards Russia as it is, then I don't think that India would, beyond a point, extend the helping hand as the Labour Party is expecting. We also have to see on the issue of immigration. As I said, that they will not be too harsh on the students going and studying, but there would be issues of visa when it comes to job market where there's a problem. They would expect a lot of Indian companies to invest. We would see how it operates and works out. So let me also add one thing, Neha, that it is not going to be again a honeymoon period between this government and Indian government. It's going to be a status quo. As it was, it will continue to be like that. We should not expect wonders. See, one reason I must add why UK is very hesitant to join back European Union is this. Today, European Union is in a crisis. There is a recessional period going on. The recessionary trends are there. So what is happening is that major economies of European Union like Germany and France are being asked to subsidize the rest of the smaller economies of European Union. Now, if UK joins back, UK being one of the larger economies, then as part of European Union, would have to subsidize scores of smaller economies which have bore the brunt more of the Ukraine-Russia conflict and 10 times increase in the price of energy, which for United Kingdom would be suicidal, given the fact that their own economy, as it is with many other countries in the Western Europe, is in a total mess. So that's the reason. India approach, they would try to show a lot of optimism, but at the same time, they will be very cautious when it comes to addressing the concerns of India. That's where the issue is. We have to see how it works out. India would push also for a rupee payment mechanism. It would be interesting to see how the British work out on that. They might not be interested because there will be other lobbies. So it's going to be as it was. There might be some positive impacts in certain areas, bits and pieces, but let's not presume that things are going to be completely a cakewalk. It's going to be, it's not going to be like that, because as you aspire to be Atmanirbhar on in many issues, as you want to be a country with an independent foreign policy, let's be very clear. The present dispensation, the new dispensation, would not have a different policy that what NATO and US
area where one usually sees continuity even when there is a change of government. And perhaps it would be fair to say that, whether it is in the United States with the Republicans and the Democrats, or the UK for that matter with Labour and the Conservatives, there has by and large been bipartisan support towards improvement of ties with India. But Chirayu Thakkar, let me ask you this question. When Rishi Sunak took over as Prime Minister of Britain, a lot of Indians were excited under the mistaken perception that because a man of Indian origin took over as British Prime Minister, suddenly, the UK was going to adopt a very pro-India policy. Now, that is a fundamental mistake because he was there as the leader of the United Kingdom, not as a representative of India. And as we know, any country's foreign policy has to be dictated primarily by its own self-interest. But coming back to the current situation, what do you think India can expect from Keir Starmer, and how much do you think he'll be willing to deliver? Of course, I think it'll be very safe to say that his top priority would be to clean up the mess at home first. But he has said that he's committed to the free trade agreement, which has been in the doldrums for a while. Do you think we can see that finally going through under Keir Starmer?
Well, first on Sunak, I think policy under Sunak was not as bad as the previous Labour dispensation 10, 14 years ago, or even some of the things have changed since David Cameron was in power. So successively there was change. There was quick action on the Khalistanis who tried to vandalize our High Commission there. There was exchange of information. They were patiently listening and giving in a lot of issues. And you also have to remember that no matter how much immigration Nigel Farage opposes, or even members of Rishi Sunak's party opposing, throughout Brexit, there was one country that was specifically mentioned positively so far as immigration was concerned. And even if you tune into GB News these days, which is like the Fox of the UK, you would consistently find people saying, oh no, we want more engineers from India. So there is a desire for talent from countries like India who can deliver them. So they may not be like for immigration as a blanket policy proposition, but they definitely favor acquisition of talent from countries like India. So that was again not an issue. Of course, the mobility issue vis-a-vis student, etc., those are the challenges that remain, because there is a huge influx of Indian students. Indians and Chinese they make, I think, the 60 to 70% of incoming student population for the UK, and that becomes a big challenge, how much space to give to those kind of new graduates. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it, would Keir Starmer be able to deliver? Now, there are 3 or 4 broad areas where there are of immediate concern or major concern, where both parties will have to sit together and negotiate and look into their national interest. So the first aspect there is political. How much political accommodation is going to happen? Now, among many other political issues, there is this issue of Khalistan. And if Keir Starmer can safely and strongly handle this issue, he can walk a tightrope, then a new model will emerge, not only for the UK, but also for other Anglosphere countries where a micro minority of Khalistanis are making a lot of negative voice, which then is splashed in on media in both countries, and that may impact the relationship. So that is one area where we will have to see creative diplomacy and creative imagination on both sides. So that's politics. The second issue is definitely free trade agreement. Now, here too, politics is deeply intertwined. So a lot of people in the know, they have told me that when the India-UK free trade negotiations happens, there are a lot of other political issues that come. It's not purely economic or not purely numbers game. People are talking about political issues. There are fugitives who have taken refuge, Indian fugitives, economic fugitives, those who have taken refuge in the UK. There are issues like Khalistan. There are other issues. So those issues are intertwined not only with the free trade agreement, but also what Keir Starmer wants to achieve domestically. Because for UK's economy to grow, the number of FTAs that they have done after Brexit, they are mostly rollover agreements. So there is no new market that they have explored essentially. Now, if they are able to do this even in two phases and get a whole section of India UK free trade agreement going, what it will happen is that they are going to add another potential trade of 5, 10, $15 billion based on the how ambitious the FTA would be, and that is going to help the UK domestically as well. So the political dimension, the domestic dimension, and the economic dimension, and the India-UK ties, all of them, they are connected somewhere, and it would require some serious thought. But the early signals that are coming from the Labour Party, especially the shadow foreign secretary, etc., they have been very clear, they have been ambitious, and to make sure that there is success, they'll also have to tame elements within their own party, which they have successfully done thus far, but we'll have to see. And I'll just want to give a small anecdote before I end this. I know we are at the end of the session, but in 1997, Robin Cook, we were in a very similar situation, and Robin Cook was the newly nominated, newly minted foreign secretary. The Queen was going to visit India. It was the 50th year of Indian independence, and he said that we can get India and Pakistan to negotiate the Kashmir issue. And I.K. Gujral was our prime minister, and he was traveling to some Middle Eastern country, or maybe it was Egypt. And he said that, UK is a third-rate power and it's better if it minds its own business. It was UK that created the mess. So that pushback is going on. And I think after 15, 20 years now, UK politicians understand that there is no more space for this kind of...
Though, Jeremy Corbyn, the former Labour leader, also created quite a controversy when he said international observers should enter Kashmir and, Kashmiris should have the right to self-determination. New Delhi made its displeasure known very clearly, but perhaps Keir Starmer is not going to make those mistakes. I'm out of time, so Patikrit Pain, last question to you very quickly. What do you think this election means personally for Rishi Sunak? He's also stepping down as the Conservative Party leader, but he's managed to hold on to his own seat in Richmond.
Neha, personally, I think he was sincere to his job, and I think as a country we are too emotional. We must realize and remember he's a British citizen of Indian origin, nothing more than that. So his allegiance, he had to deliver for Britain, not for India. So he did what he could have done. During the worst of the situations, he was given a job which no one else was willing to take, and he did it what was possible for him, humanly possible. But the writing was on the wall, and he faced it bravely. But I think, yes, there are challenges, as you rightly mentioned in the beginning of the, this program, that age is on his side. The possibility of him coming back within 10 years is not ruled out, or 5 years, because you never know. The electorate is such that tomorrow they may again bring the Conservatives.
Staged a comeback recently as the Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom, and if nothing else, Rishi Sunak definitely has age on his side. All right, on that note, Chirayu Thakkar, Patikrit Pain, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. And as we wrap up this edition, let's play the story for you. In his first speech after taking over as Prime Minister, Keir Starmer has said the country, the UK, needed a bigger reset, a rediscovery of who we are, as he put it. He said this was a vote for change and vowed that the work of change begins immediately.
You fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now.
Britain's Labour Party won by a landslide in the country's parliamentary elections early on Friday, booting out the Conservative-led government after 14 years in power. Incoming Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke of new beginnings in his victory speech.
We said we would end the chaos, and we will. We said we would turn the page, and we have. Today we start the next chapter, begin the work of change, the mission of national renewal, and start to rebuild our country.
Labour voters cheered as the party was projected to capture nearly 2/3 of the 650 seats in Parliament. But Starmer comes to power facing a sluggish economy, creaking public services and falling living standards. All of that played a part in the Conservatives' demise, with voters punishing them for a cost of living crisis, as well as years of instability and infighting that saw 5 different prime ministers in office since the Brexit vote of 2016. The Conservatives were forecast to win just about 130 seats, the worst election performance in the party's history. Outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak conceded Conservative defeat Friday morning, though he managed to keep his own seat in Parliament.
Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides. That is something that should give us all confidence in our country's stability and future.
The Conservatives also took a hit from the rise of the right-wing populist Reform UK party. Reform leader and Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage finally won a seat in Parliament after 7 failed attempts over the years. His party captured 4 seats in total, and in parts of the country, they won more votes than the Conservatives. The surge in support for a populist alternative echoed similar results in Europe recently. But, unlike France, where the far-right National Rally Party made historic gains in last Sunday's first-round elections, overall, the British public has thrown their weight behind a centre-left party to bring about change.
Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. The United Kingdom has a new government and a new Prime Minister. Let's see what happens next. This is a story we'll continue to track closely. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend ahead. Do join us again at the same time on Monday.
The confidence is certainly back in the market.
Do tighten your seat belt so that you can withstand volatility.
I have one humble request to all the viewers of News 9 is that please don't go, there will be a lot of choppiness, there will be a lot of volatility. Look at